So there's a type of fine-tuning argument for God's existence that's not the exact same as the one that most people are familiar with, but this one's called an argument from nomological harmony. The argument is constructed from the initial conditions of the universe and the laws that seemingly apply to the initial conditions of the universe. So you don't even need to know what the initial conditions of the universe were to know that some type of law had to govern the initial conditions in order to get them moving or get them started or get them interacting with each other, however you want to put it. Now, there are multiple different views on what the laws even are, and I myself don't take a governing view of laws, as in, I don't think that there are literal laws that causally affect things in order to make them act as they do. I think the laws of nature are just mere descriptions of the laws of things or the ways that things act, and the argument can still be ran off of this. The original argument gives the comparison from, a game and the kind of instructions that govern what the game pieces can do. So you can have a multitude of different types of game pieces and you can have a multitude of different types of instructions. And it's not necessary that the instructions actually apply to the game at hand. And so this would be analogous to our universe. The universe has a set of initial conditions and laws that govern those initial conditions, and it's not necessary that the laws that actually govern the initial conditions really apply to the initial conditions. So you could have, in the initial conditions, charged particles, but there's a law that applies to charged particles and not charged particles, just leaving a stillborn universe that doesn't actually go anywhere. And like I said, I take a type of view of laws where laws are just descriptions of how things work and interact with other things. And so, in my view, charged particles acting a particular way wouldn't need any further explanation because I can just make a non-contrived appeal to necessity. The reason that charged particles act in the particular way they do is just because they're a charged particle. And any conceivable way that they could have been different would just be a description of something that's not a charged particle. And I hold this view because I'm an Aristotelian. I think that things have real essences or natures, but a lot of atheists, or the majority of atheists, are not Aristotelians because that view would just lead them to God's existence. Point being, atheists can't make that move, and if they do, it would have to be in a different type of way, but the argument could still be ran because now we can argue from the particular types of essences or, natures of things that actually exist. So basically, there are a wide plethora of ways that the laws and initial conditions that could have been, most leaving the universe stillborn, because most of the ways that the laws could have been just would have not applied to the initial conditions. Like I said, you could have laws that govern charged particles, but there aren't charged particles, there are actually charged particles. So you need the right set of laws that actually apply to the initial conditions. Or if you take my type of view or a view that's, kind of like it, and you think that laws are just, describing the mere regularities or ways that things act, you could argue from the fact that there are things that can actually interact with each other. So basically, if we go to the initial conditions and you don't think the laws causally affect the initial conditions in such a way where they would need an explanation as to why they're compatible, and you think they're just kind of mere descriptions of the initial conditions, well, it's still insanely improbable that the initial conditions can interact with each other. Different entities have different ways that they can act upon things, and different entities have different ways that they can be acted upon. Just one conceivable scenario, you could have a neutrino, and you could have a large wooden block. The neutrino doesn't have the type of properties that can actually interact with the electromagnetic force that governs the wooden block. It wouldn't lead to anything interesting. So basically, just getting the universe running is insanely improbable. It's not probable that the laws actually apply to the initial conditions. Furthermore, if you don't take that view, it's not probable that the types of initial conditions that actually exist in such a way that they would interact with each other and result in anything interesting. Rather, just something stillborn that doesn't result in anything. And so when we hypothesize about what kind of explanation would make us expect the universe that actually has laws that apply to its initial conditions that lead to interesting things, or again, just initial conditions that interact with each other at all, one candidate explanation would be a God that values the types of things that we experience in our world. And so he would want a type of universe that isn't stillborn. He would want a universe that leads to things. He would want things to exist with natures that can actually interact with each other, so these things can ultimately come about. And so I didn't just give a fleshed out theistic hypothesis, and I also didn't present any other competing hypotheses. There are other candidate explanations, one being like the ensemble view, all the particular ways the laws could have existed just do exist, and that's why the initial conditions are able to act in such a way where it leads to things interesting. Any competing hypothesis that someone wants to put forth, I'm gladly willing to argue with it. I'm not saying that this is some knockdown argument, but I do think that those different hypotheses have maybe like different problems in terms of parsimony or how simple the hypothesis is and other things like that. I think there are other theoretical virtues that theism holds as well, but that's a different conversation.